In this week's episode of Naruto Shippuden, Shikamaru's side story comes to a conclusion, which is somewhat anticlimactic, I have to admit. I will say, though, that this week's episode had some fantastic characterization, and fans of shipping are certainly going to love this episode, as you finally get to see the formations of the relationships between Shikamaru, Temari, Ino, and Sai. One of the cool things about this week's episode of Naruto Shippuden is that it does not waste any time. We immediately get into the action with Choji, Ino, and Temari going up against the mind-controlled Roku, So, and Sai. And I thought there'd be a little bit more to actually, defeating this ability, finding a way to undo the genjutsu or the mind control. Apparently, all that's required is just beating the ever-living shit out of your friends. With Choji using his signature techniques of growing into a giant and absolutely punching the ever-living shit out of Ro, then you have Temari, who supposedly is able to control the power of her wind scythe ability to the point where she won't actually completely chop up someone into a million pieces. That's actually how she ends up taking out Soku in this episode, and I had to sort of suspend my disbelief for a second, because that technique is incredibly devastating and can cut down forests, but it doesn't even leave a scratch on Soku. And then, of course, there's Ino and Sai, which I honestly think this battle is perfect, because for those who read the manga, for those who've seen the movies, you do learn that Ino and Sai do end up together and form a family. And you get to see the beginnings of that in this episode. And honestly, it was probably the best part of the episode for me in terms of what the actual action was and what the actual, development was behind it. Because you can see that Ino is desperately trying to get through to Sai to let him know that if he didn't care about what was going on, why would he be crying during this situation? There's a scene where he has this one single tear going down his eye, because even though he has no control over his own body or actions, he realizes that what he's doing is wrong. And Ino uses her signature mind transfer ability to get inside of his head and to basically bring him back to the light side of the Force. The rest of the episode is basically Shikamaru having a confrontation with Gengo, and this is where things start to get a little more interesting. And by a little more interesting, I mean it feels a little shoehorned. Basically, we get to learn that Gengo was apparently a follower of Zabuza Momochi, the first major villain from the Naruto series and former ninja swordsman of the Hidden Mist Village. And that makes sense because Gengo himself even has a very large sword and wanted to basically do what Zabuza could not, which is starting his own nation, getting rid of the concept of the feudal lords, and bringing in a brand new bloody era for the shinobi of the Naruto world. I have to say, though, it is just seeming a little ham-fisted when he decides to bring up Zabuza. It just feels like there's no connection there whatsoever. We never really saw these characters interacting. We just have to take Gengo's word for it. That and the fact that, honestly, his abilities are just lame as hell. Basically, he uses his genjutsu combined with his voice to make people see the inner darkness inside of their hearts so that it'll, transform their chakra into some sort of weird, freaky clone. It just comes across as just a little too cheesy for my liking, and almost seems like something that you would see in, the Care Bears. It just doesn't really do much for me. And then we have the final confrontation where Shikamaru, Roku, and So manage to take down the villain. Sunrise, sunset. That is the end of that story. But the rest of the episode, they do manage to wrap up a couple of things. We get to see the return of Yurito, the ninja intern, who's basically there just to be incredibly peppy and annoying. He's like Robin from the Lego Batman movie. The final couple scenes of this week's episode are definitely there for the fans. The scene where Shikamaru awkwardly asks Temari on a date is really cute. I have to admit, it was a really nice scene. Again, just planting the seeds for their relationship in the future, and definitely making it clear that Temari is wearing the pants in this relationship. The cherry on top of this shipping Sunday, of course, is also that Sai decides to ask Ino out, which is really funny, because she's there basically giving Shikamaru a really hard time, but as soon as Sai starts talking to her, she literally starts melting like butter. It's just a very funny scene. The episode ends when Shikamaru begins his greatest mission, as he tries to figure out what the hell he's going to do on his date with Temari. Luckily, Roku and So are there to give him some much-needed advice. So what's the rundown on this week's episode of Naruto Shippuden? Aside from the fact that this villain completely sucks, this was a pretty satisfying episode right here. I think the thing that most people are really going to love is basically the moments between Sai and Ino and Shikamaru and Temari. They're moments that honestly even I'd want to see. but we don't get to spend that much time with him. Most of this episode is basically just sort of your by-the-numbers Naruto action, which to say is, it's exciting, but it's not really reinventing the wheel or do anything all that new or crazy. However, I have to say though, I really do love the stories that focus on the side characters of the series, especially ones that definitely need some development. And Shikamaru is a character who truly has grown since the very first part of the series. I've said it many times before in some of my previous reviews that I never expected Shikamaru to ever be an important character. I thought he was there basically just to be like an annoying obstacle or just to be like kind of a dick in the background. But no, instead of being just a big dick, he's actually a really surprisingly helpful character who's constantly looking out for the future. There's a lot of the scenes in this episode that really demonstrate that perfectly, like when Gengo's trying to get into his head, and he's saying that, look, if you don't go along with me, something real bad might happen to your friends and family, like maybe even Mirai, or even Kurenai, something like that. And then, of course, he is reminded that the reason he's doing all of this is so that he can allow Naruto to become the Hokage and look after him. It's a shame that Naruto is not really even in this arc at all, but at least we're going to be able to spend some time with him in the next couple of episodes, which are going to be all about Naruto and Hinata's wedding. I can already hear the fanbase freaking out about this one, and honestly I think it's going to be one of the perfect ways to end Naruto Shippuden before we move on to the Boruto story. They get married, they start a family, they have a son, and his son gets his very own damn anime series. We can only hope that it's going to live up to the lofty heights of Naruto Shippuden, but we're going to have to wait and see. This week's episode, though, was pretty solid, had pretty good production value, but then again, nothing too crazy going on. Really, I think it was more about the character interactions and the action this week, and it's definitely something that you should check out if you're a big fan of the side characters of the Naruto series, especially Shikamaru, his friends, and Temari. So, a solid end to Shikamaru's story. I did enjoy Sasuke's just a little bit more. That being said, I think this was a great supplement to the series, which I highly recommend if you just want some more Naruto action or just some more Naruto characterization. I will say is, everybody should tune in next week for the whole, like, Naruto-Hinata wedding story. I think it's going to be a lot of fun, I think it's going to be really goofy, and it's going to be nice to have a nice big levity episode before we move on to the Boruto anime. So, I'm going to give this episode right here a solid 4 out of 5. I loved the characters in this week's episode. The action and the villain really weren't all that great. Luckily, this week's episode was saved by the very popular and infectious and fun characters of the Naruto series. So check it out, Naruto fans. If any of you did watch this week's episode, make sure to tell me what you thought about it in the comments section below. Did you like this whole Shikamaru side story? Were you side splitting when he was actually trying to ask Temari out on a date? What do you hope to see from the Naruto-Hinata wedding story and the rest of Naruto Shippuden before we move on to Boruto? Thank you guys so much for watching this review. Make sure to like the video and share it with all of your friends. Leave me a comment or two, and make sure to subscribe to the channel for everything Naruto related and anime reviews. I will see you guys next time, and as always, stay dandy, baby!